Hello everyone, welcome back to Tell You the Truth, I Have No Idea, episode number 3. I'm Matt Franco, he is Mike Folk. Just the two of us today, just because we thought, rather than having a round table, let's just get this discussion about the T word out of the way. It is the number one question I field when people walk in the shop here. What about the tariffs? How are the tariffs affecting you? What's your opinion on the tariffs? So this is just going to be a short one. We're just going to touch on a few things from our perspective and maybe how it affects the business as a whole. But since from the retailer perspective, tariffs are not really such a huge issue because I don't have to deal with price posting and logistics and shipping and taxes before I sell the wine. That all gets handled at the cash register. Obviously, it affects me on a pricing level, which in turn affects everybody else. But I'm going to throw it right to Mike because he's the guy who has to deal with all this crap. So let's do it.
All right. So the best place to start is probably to give the timeline of what the tariffs actually look like and how they will trickle down to you and then ultimately the customer. So I don't think it should be a surprise to anybody when Trump came in, the tariffs were going to be on the table. We dealt with this in his first administration. It was mostly on China, but there were tariffs that affected our industry because of the tariffs vis-a-vis the Airbus-Boeing dispute. So I wasn't shocked when Trump got in, and in March of 25, he started talking about tariffs and this idea of a liberation day, liberating Americans from their ability to buy inexpensive goods from around the world, as Peter Schiff said.
Right.
So,
I feel liberated.
Yeah. Okay, so in March, he says he's going to make this announcement. There was some backlash from Europe in particular, and that's when this idea of 200% tariffs on wine comes about. At that point, at least from our perspective, we started not freaking out, but at least saying like, okay, we got to take this seriously. So the first thing we did was we paused all of our orders. At that point, anything that wasn't already in motion, put on a pause, because 200%, that's game over. That's a total industry changer. So, all right, April 2nd comes around. That was when he made the announcements, and we found out that it was going to be 20%. It was presented as being reciprocal, and for anyone who watched it, you saw this whole spiel about, these countries are tariffing us at this rate. All that was total nonsense. The whole reciprocal thing was a fantasy term. It was actually based on the trade deficit. I mean, that's really what this is all about, is trying to lower or even out the trade deficit. So 20% tariffs is what we came away from that announcement thinking we were going to have to deal with. So the next thing that we, and I would imagine other distributors and importers, started doing was refiling their prices, working that 20% tariff in. Thankfully, this time around, the tariffs they weren't immediate. There was a grace period before they were going to get into effect. So anything that we couldn't pause that was already on the water, thankfully, we're not going to be subject to those tariffs.
Right.
But then anything that we were planning on ordering from moving forward, we're going to get hit with the tariff. So that was the first week of April. By mid-April, he capitulated slightly because the EU pushed back. And he said, okay, I'm going to do away with the reciprocals, but there was a baseline tariff for everyone, so 10%. So that's good news, except we then had to turn around and refile all those prices at 10% rather than 20%.
And just so everybody knows, you have to file the pricing how far in advance?
So essentially you have a month. So right now we're middle of May. We have until the first week of June to get our pricing in for July.
For July. Okay, so you essentially have to be 30 days ahead of.
Yeah, well, so in April, when the announcement was made, there was a brief window to increase things for May. But then once it went back down, so for example, one of my reps noticed the other day that something we have filed for May is actually higher than it should be. It's where it should be for June, but we missed getting it corrected for May. So that was another challenge, was just all the administrative work that had to be done to mark them up 20 and then 10. Anyways, so we assume that we're stable for the moment. I mean, the idea that the reciprocals have been taken away is a 90-day pause.
Right.
I don't think they're going to come back, just based on the fact that Trump has basically capitulated with everyone at this point now.
Yeah.
Seemingly.
Right.
So I think it would probably look silly to reinstate these reciprocal tariffs. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, that's the part. His whole game is being unpredictable. So
exactly.
You always have to keep that in mind.
Right. Which, I mean, look, going out on a more broader scale, this is what some of the real challenges have been just for industry in large. It's like, how do you plan?
Yeah.
How do you plan a month ahead? How do you plan a quarter ahead if you don't know what you're going to be dealing with in terms of increased prices? And what's the demand going to be?
Right.
That's something that I think is really going to be interesting to see what this actually looks like.
Yep.
As we get into this, because for right now, our prices are still untariffed. So from your perspective, you haven't seen anything yet.
I haven't seen anything yet, no. I mean, people have started raising prices on certain things. I don't know what the strategy is there, but yeah.
Right. Okay, so for right now, we're set. Anything that is about to arrive will have the 10% tariff added into it. And since it's a percentage for the low-end things, so a wine that is 96 a case, that's still going to be in the low 100s.
Right.
So probably not a huge deal.
No.
Something that was, let's say, 160 a case, which I always thought about back in my retail days as kind of like the golden price point, because that's, you can go 19.99, you can go 20 if you want to play with that sort of psychological game.
Right.
From a customer's perspective, if it's
one I've never
under
done.
$20.
Yeah. Right.
Something that's 160 now, you're going to be in the mid 170s. So again, still not a big, going from 20 to 22, not a big deal. Where it's probably going to be more impactful is on the higher end.
Yep. Right.
You're just going to see those prices increase exponentially.
Right.
So again, on the low end, not going to be a big deal. But as you start creeping up, which we talked about in previous podcasts, that was already the challenge as we've seen it in the market.
Right. I mean, that's the first thing I think of hearing you say all of this, is that prices have been on the rise, I mean, for a decade now. It's just been, not on everything, obviously, but especially when you're talking about at the higher end. I mean, it seemed like there was never going to be a ceiling. This is something we've touched on before, too, on these prices. Now I think we're hitting the ceiling, right? And are you done making your initial kind of points? Yeah, before I dive into this.
Yeah, I mean, there's more to it, but I'm curious how you think this is going to play out on your level.
Well, I mean, and that's the thing. The reason I want to bring this up is because tariffs and general price increases running into the headwinds of buyers at the high end saying, I'm kind of done paying these prices, or I'm done paying these increases, and just people stepping away from purchasing at all levels, whether they're drinking less or they're just spending less, whatever. It's just not the ideal formula, I'll put it that way.
Perfect storm.
Yeah, perfect storm. So we'll see. I mean, up until this point, like in terms of people's buying frequency, I don't know that it's really dropped all that much. I think people are just focusing on different things. I mean, the ultra high-end collector, you almost have to separate them from the rest of the market, right? Because if they want the wine, they're the people of the means who are just going to go get the wine. And whether they're hanging back, waiting for people to start shedding inventory, which is something that's also happening, or they decided they have too much wine, or they're just going to focus on more value. It's definitely a thing. Like, people are definitely buying less, spending less. And if you're a collector and you have 5 cellars full of wine around the country, and you were buying solely because, you want to drink some of it, but you have more wine than you're ever going to drink in multiple lifetimes, what are you going to do if prices crater on all of those wines? When people stop buying, then all of a sudden, all that wine that you, up until this point, smartly socked away because it was a smart investment, even if you don't get to drink it. I mean, that's calamity, So it's not a good formula, as I said.
So you're a bit of an anomaly, because I think the way this is going to shake out is it's obviously going to affect different people differently.
Yep.
So someone in the West Village is going to have a different experience than someone who was in, let's say, a more working class neighborhood or even area, because this extends outside of New York City.
Of course, yeah.
So I imagine you're probably not going to see as much of a pushback on the everyday walk-in buyer. What do you think? Like, again, if you're thinking the low end, you're talking a couple bucks a bottle, it's going to creep up.
Yeah. And maybe, that was kind of going to be my next point, is that the everyday buyer who's buying, who only really purchases what they need to take home and consume, I mean, they have no choice, right? It's like when we go to the store and buy, staples for home, we have no choice but to pay what the price is, right?
Right.
Now, I mean, with wine, there's the ability to kind of shop around and, price shop. But, I mean,
by and large, the person who's coming in who wants that bottle
is not the kind of person who's going to do that. They're coming in because this is a neighborhood shop that they like, and I think, and, they appreciate the effort we put into the selections. So, yeah, at the end of the day, I think they're just going to have to take it on the chin to the extent that it is that, like you said, because at the lower end, it's not going to make all that big of a difference, right?
Right.
But, people are going to feel it, right? They feel it no matter what.
No question. Well,
yeah.
here's the other thing, too. It's not just that the wines are going to be subject to the tariffs, the imported wines. And this will also affect non-imported wines as well. The conversations that I've had with domestic producers is that they're not immune to this.
This is a really good point. Yeah.
A lot of the products that they're, on the one hand, a lot of the products that they're buying, not the actual grapes, but the cardboard, the bottles, the corks, these things are not being made stateside. So there's that factor. But the other factor, too, is a lot of these producers are in portfolios that are largely made up of imported wines.
Yeah.
Mostly European wines.
Right.
So they have an incentive, to really try to help their distributors. And the conversations that we have been very much like, hey, what can we do to help?
Yeah.
That's a good thing. But again, ultimately, everyone's going to feel the pinch. Even the tariff itself that's not the only thing we have to be considering here, because this whole thing about the trade deficit is also about the dollar.
Yes.
Weak dollar makes it easier.
Oh, yes.
Makes it easier to export goods. So whatever goods we're making here that we want to offshore, a weaker dollar makes it easier to do that.
Yeah.
And we've already seen that.
Yeah.
The euro to dollar exchange has basically been at parity for the past couple of years. We now saw that shoot up. The euro was at 114 a week or so ago. It's come down a little bit. I think it was 111 yesterday. But that's something else that we have to factor in on the import side.
And it's not just like, I mean, unless you're the kind of company that has the cash on hand to say, like, all right, I'm going to commit to, 30 cases of that, and I'm going to pay you right this second. That's the only time, because you got the volatility of the exchange rate is a huge factor. I remember when I was doing the DI buying at a previous job, it was like you'd try to calculate it and get a price out so the people could start selling it, and then you'd go back and check the exchange rate, and it spiked. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it dipped, and then hey, you come out on top of that. But you have to, like, it's this whole strategy thing that you guys have to deal with.
Right.
Like, how do you try to stay out in front of all of that stuff?
Well, you have to peg it. You have to set it at a point and say, okay, we're going to work within a certain margin.
Right.
Once it gets over this point, then we're going to have to go up. If it dips down below a certain point, we can come down, because you don't want to be in a situation where every month your prices are fluctuating.
Yeah, of course. So, like, do you just, quick aside from your strategic perspective, do you, like, if the euro is at $1.15, what kind of cushion do you build in? 10 cents?
I mean, it depends. There's always a little bit of a cushion, because you want to avoid the constant.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So you don't have a straight formula.
No, and again, it varies. Mm-hmm. We try to look at it on a quarterly basis. Mm-hmm. Again, you peg a number and you try to keep it there.
Right.
Now, again, if it goes up or it goes down and it goes outside of those margins that you set, then you have to go up or down. But by and large, and again, we've been lucky because for the past couple of years, we haven't really had to worry about it.
Right. Right.
We've actually been benefiting from it. We'll see. On top of that,
We'll see.
Well, and the other thing too is that with a weaker dollar, ultimately you're going to end up with more inflation. I mean, obviously this is not an economics discussion, and there are people who clearly have forgotten more than I'll ever know about this stuff, but I try to at least stay somewhat informed.
Right.
I mean, I don't see the Fed increasing rates. If anything, I mean, there's pressure to go down.
Right. Right.
And if the market tightens, interest rates are most likely going to go down. So what does that mean? On the flip side of it, it means more inflation.
Yeah.
So my outlook personally, like just me as a human being,
Right.
as an American living in this country and dealing with all of this, my assumptions are that we're going to be seeing more inflation.
Yeah.
So now looking at that from the business side of, I mean, last week we got a notification that the warehouse that many New York distributors, importers use, they're doing another price increase. It's not a big one, but I believe it's the third in 2 years.
Yeah. And, you know, you have to think about how much, like, this is, again, like, you might not think of this at home, but, okay, they get the wine here, they got out in front of the correct exchange rate and the tariffs, and then all that wine is sitting at a warehouse, and you're paying every month for that.
You're paying every month to store it, you're paying to deliver it.
Yep. And then, you know, if sales are slower here or something's not moving, you know, what's the next thing you got to do? You got to say, what's the CBA of holding this stuff, you know? And which leads to, you know, people moving stuff out the door with aggressively low pricing, right?
Which we're already seeing.
Yeah. I mean, we've been seeing that for years. Like, I mean, you know, some of these bigger books, you know, not quite the behemoths that we all complain about, but some of these other sizable books that sell great wine, you know, some of them have had closeout lists in the month of December, which is unheard of. You usually get that maybe in like the early spring, there'll be a closeout list, and then you get one in August. People have had running closeout lists for 24 months at this point, you know.
Right.
Again, this is like perfect storm kind of thing, you know.
Well, and it's everywhere too. There was a tasting here 2 weeks ago. You had winemakers in town from all over the world, and they're all feeling it. I mean, everyone's feeling it. These have been the consistent conversations that we have with the growers, is that they're having problems in Europe, they're having problems with their Asian distributors. You know, everyone is feeling the pinch right now.
Yeah. And
the sentiment in this market, which again we've touched on in the previous 2 episodes, is that there's just a ton of wine in the market.
Yep.
You know, because we all experienced, or at least most of us who've been in this industry now for more than 5 years, we experienced that golden era.
Yeah.
We experienced those 20 years where selling wine was pretty easy. If anything, it was just like the flywheel was moving.
Yeah, you bring in a new thing, people are excited about it, it moves right out. Now you bring in a new thing, like, and again, like, this is like, so you have like, obviously there's the established wines, right? And so like it used to be that the stuff that someone would bring it in, if it doesn't move, then they'll be like, all right, we're going to price this to move, and then we'll see how subsequent vintages work. Like, you know, some little Beaujolais or something like that, you know, some little wine from southern Italy. Now it's like we're cutting the prices on like the wines that have established audiences, that have established demand. And when you start seeing those wines go on sale, that's an indicator of like just the things are sitting. Like, you always tell me that you try to be as honest as you can with your suppliers, your producers, right? They'll say, hey, you ready to place an order? And, you know, maybe you go into it better than I can, but you're always like, look, here's the situation. I want to place an order, but I have no room for it right now. And this is stuff that you want to bring in. You know, you gotta make the call to say like, all right, well, we need to keep our Prosecco in stock. We need to keep some of our fast-moving stuff in stock. So what's going to take a back seat? The really interesting, cool wine that you and I both, and everybody in the industry like us, that's the stuff you're most passionate about. And that's the stuff that's hardest. That's the stuff that's either sitting here, or it's sitting at the warehouse, or it's sitting at the producer's cellar. You know, what does that mean?
Yeah, it's a challenge because it's not like most other industries where, okay, if you see a trend, sales are trending down, okay, well, let's make less.
Yeah.
There's always a new vintage that's coming in behind the previous one, or maybe even the one before that still hasn't sold through. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge. It's a lot harder now to forecast out, to make reservations. And you never want to reserve something and then not be able to take it, or then try to diminish the quantities that you reserve, because the producer has to print back labels. There's work on their end that's required. They can't just easily say like, oh, okay, well, I'll just, I'll that pallet less that you're going to take, I'll sell it elsewhere. Again, everyone is experiencing these things in the same ways. It's a global problem.
It's a global problem, and you want to maintain the relationship. And, part of maintaining that relationship is being able to take wine consistently from the producer, because they don't want to have to sit on it. And then, it's difficult. And that's why, we've lightly touched on this, but this is something I don't think we've really gone into depth about, is that one of the things we've been seeing here in New York, at least, where we have all these cool books of, independent farmer producers, a lot of wines are skipping around from book to book at an incredible rate right now. And these are wines that are really good, that people are excited about, that people want, but it just, things don't stick. And you find producers are more inclined to jump ship from book to book in hopes that something's going to take off. And it's not a problem with the effort that distributors and importers are putting in, or that, retailers or restaurants are putting into selling a wine. It's just that there's not the volume right now to support all of this.
Well,
what do you think?
That's been playing out for a little while. I fear that it's going to accelerate.
Yeah. And that's, again, just to emphasize this point, this is not a new problem. This is not because of the tariffs. This has been going on since COVID. I have, some people might try to play close to the vest and be like, oh yeah, but no, this has been going on 3 years now, problem.
Sure.
And it's so the tariffs are just an extra layer on top of that.
Right. And that's a great point too, that I'm glad, at least the conversations that we were having with people when all this started to come about. So going back to March, when there was the potential of a massive tariff, and the conversations that at least we were having was like, well, this is on top of this mountain of other issues that we've all been dealing with. Again, go back to our first episode. We really talked a lot about the diminishing consumption of alcohol, all the pressure in the industry about, why people shouldn't be drinking, et cetera, cannabis, and also the inflation. Coming at a time where during COVID, not only did we have the first round of tariffs that were placed on a smattering of goods from the EU, you also had all the supply chain issues that was making, container costs doubled.
Oh my gosh.
The amount you would pay to get the wine from point A to point B literally doubled just to get the vessel.
Yeah.
Then you had the winemakers who literally couldn't get bottles or couldn't get cartons. Or if they could, the prices were going up significantly. So all those things increased the prices of wine at a time when everything else was increasing in price because we had just printed a fuck ton of money.
Yep.
Only a few years after printing a fuck ton of money after the financial crisis. So you had, and this is why, again, my outlook in the long term is optimistic. Ultimately, I do think these things are cyclical.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But at least for the short to midterm, I'm pretty bearish on things, because if you just look at the trends of the past 20 years, what it tells me is that we're just going to be seeing more of this. And by more of this, I mean we're going to see more inflationary pressure.
Yeah.
And what happens when you have those periods is that there's consolidation.
Yep.
Okay, because, and I understand it. If I'm a winemaker and I have a cellar full of wine, and the people I've been working with, maybe it's been amazing, it's been awesome, but now they're crunched.
Yeah, people you really like, you love the relationship, but sooner or later you have to make the business decision. Yeah.
And look, it's always easy for when a winemaker jumps from one book to another because they're at least getting that order.
Yeah, that first order, right?
The challenge is what happens after that.
Yep.
Can they then continue to grow?
Yeah, and that's, this is, again, maybe something that, you folks listening might not understand, is that if a producer jumps books, like, the gold standard of that happening is whoever the new importer distributor is buys the stocks off of the old importer distributor, but that doesn't always happen now.
No.
And what happens is that importer distributor who's holding those stocks now they just got to dump it. So then that sets back that producer's minds probably for at least 12 months in terms of the new supplier selling them, because people say like, oh yeah, I love those wines, you have them now, and then they notice that previous supplier has them in their book at some insane discount, and then some people are going to be like, look, yeah, I'll take a case from you, but I'm going to go buy 5 from that guy too, just to pad my pricing. And so there's all of these things that, look, ultimately this is like a conversation about global economics, right? This is not just this about the wine business, but specific to the wine business, that is something that happens, and it's another 5 miles per hour to the headwind or something like that,
And it's also, there's a bit of a like death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah.
For everyone involved, because the producer can only eat so much. The producer can only cut their prices to help move through this vintage to get to the next one.
Yep.
The importer, it's the same thing. The importer can only discount prices so many times before they say, this just isn't working for us.
Yep.
On top of the tariffs, on top of the exchange rate, on top of prices being increased on the local level with things like warehouses, the other challenge with the tariffs is that your cash flow gets squeezed even more, because the importer has to pay the tariff when the boat arrives, effectively. So even if I have great terms with a winemaker, so the wine leaves, it gets here, it's in the warehouse, we can start selling it, I might have another 30, 60 days before I have to pay that invoice. Right. So ideally, we get some of the wine into the market, maybe even in the best case scenario, we start receiving some payables for what we sold.
Right.
But when you add in the fact that you have to pay 10% of the value of that order every time that order arrives, you now have to factor that into your cash flow.
Yeah.
So just for easy numbers, $20,000 order arrives, okay, there's $2,000. You got to lay out for that.
Yeah.
Now times that, I talked to someone the other day, they're like, I have $300,000 on the water. So there's $30,000 they're going to have to come up with when that lands. So that's the other challenge too, particularly for smaller books where they probably don't have that much cash on hand.
Yep.
So then what do you do?
Right.
So this goes back into like, all right, if we have a scenario where the market is already challenging, where sales are already sort of sluggish or at least just not as easy as they have been in the past. Now on top of that, you have increased pricing. If we also assume there's going to be pressure on the consumer, for lack of a better term, because everything else is going to get more expensive, i.e. inflation, there's less disposable income. What does that mean? It means that those that are in the position, because they have the cash, they're going to be able to hoard.
Yeah.
They're going to be, it's going to be classic consolidation.
Right.
That's how I see this playing out in the worst case scenario. And it probably trickles down to your level, I have to imagine, because how many retailers can deal with, diminishing profits or customers trading down to the lower level where, it's just not as much money coming in as there was previously. Your rent's not going down.
No.
So I'm curious, like how exactly this plays out. The worst case scenario I see is that there's more consolidation. We have the Amazon effect.
Right.
On the retail side, on the distribution side. I think that is a real concern. It's something that could manifest itself if this goes the way that I think it could potentially go.
Yeah. And consolidation means like ultimately less wine in the market, which that's a for better or worse thing. Like I could see, there's no upside to that, I guess, technically speaking, but think about okay, so think about think about this from the state government level too, right? Right now, it's been a discussion forever. We touched on it last time about whether or not New York State allows supermarkets to start selling wine. And then you think about, you brought up Amazon, right? What does Amazon own? Whole Foods. Whole Foods has locations all over the country, specifically tons of locations all over New York State, right? Just here in the city. So then you get to this point where if Whole Foods starts selling wine and their parent company has all the cash on hand that they could ever want, right? And then they start coming to you as a small book and being like, hey, Mike, we'll buy your whole book and we'll just distribute it around our stores in New York State. Then you get to this point where it's like the ultimate consolidation, the ultimate monopoly, right? Like, because they might not have the bandwidth to hand sell all the wines that someone like me or some of the other shops like me has, but they just say, screw it. We're going to buy all of these things. We're just going to park them on our website everywhere. And especially people can just buy them through Amazon, right? Like, I'm sure they'll find a loophole where you can just do Amazon Prime for wine. Then what do we get, right? They'll maintain a lot of the fine wine that people want, but it's ultimately going to they'll start that at first, right? And then, that business model, it's impossible for that to work in an efficient way. So what they'll do is they'll just start whittling things down. And then you have the ultimate problem of consolidation, where it's like which is the ultimate problem, economically speaking, of all monopolies, is diminished availability, diminished variety, selection, and diminished price competition, and that's not good for anybody.
Correct.
This is like obviously a huge hypothetical situation, but when state governments are facing budget deficits, and if sales are down everywhere and there's less tax revenue, what do? They always choose the path of least resistance, right?
Sure.
They choose things like congestion pricing here in New York City, or the like, right? Subway fare increases, whatever, increases on taxes. But all those lobbyists at big distributors and for big companies like Amazon or grocery store chains are going to say, like, yeah, just let us do it this way. And, here's this guaranteed tax revenue for you. Mm-hmm. Sales tax revenue, whatever. Again.
Well, and we already saw some of this. This hasn't really been discussed much recently, but the whole at-rest thing.
Oh my gosh, I almost forgot about that, yeah.
The idea that in order to sell any alcohol beverage in New York State, you needed to be warehoused in New York State. And
for
the vast majority,
a minimum of 2 weeks or something like that. It had to
or even 48 hours.
Yeah,
it had
that's
to sit in a warehouse.
At rest. The wine has to be at rest at a warehouse in New York State.
Right.
Now, the warehouse you referenced before that almost all of you guys use, where is that?
New Jersey.
It's in New Jersey.
And for good reason.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to get the ships at port, to get the goods from the port to the warehouse.
Yeah, it's like right there. It's in
Edison.
Yeah.
So the at-rest thing, to me that was just such an obvious way of the two biggest behemoth distributors consolidating.
Yeah.
Because they're already
set.
They already have their warehouses here. Yep. So if they can cut out all those people who aren't warehousing here, boom, overnight, they become essential to your business.
Right, and a monopoly, which is what they have in most states. New York State, New Jersey, DC is the most open market, California. There's a reason that almost all importer distributors are based in those states, is because that is the place where these are the states where a small book can operate the way that you guys operate. In most other states, those 2 or 3 big national distributors essentially have a monopoly. Now, obviously, the audience is different in different places, so there just might not make sense for you to distribute in certain states. But, the bottom line is that was a monopolistic move, and you're always facing that pressure from, powerful forces in state houses. Mm-hmm. And the liquor business, the big distributors, who, let's be honest, are vestiges of organized crime, essentially. they're constantly trying to find ways to hoodwink state reps and state senators into passing legislation that solely benefits them.
Well, that's an At Rest, Wine and Grocery.
Yep.
There's all direct lines
Yeah.
back to those entities.
Yeah.
Because that will benefit the biggest players involved.
Yep. And to extent, like, again, like getting back, like the Amazon thing I mentioned is like purely hypothetical, and I still think it's very much a long shot, because no company that massive has the bandwidth to, or the desire, because to sell all the different types of wines that people like you and I sell, because it just, like, they'll take one look at the grand spreadsheet and say, like, well, selling all of these little wines requires a lot of effort. We have to hire people who are very knowledgeable and blah, blah, blah. And to an extent, yeah, like if you go to a state like, I don't know, that already has wine in supermarkets, and like, we were at a, up in the Berkshires visiting friends, and we went into this little local, kind of like upscale supermarket, and they have a wine department, and they have a guy who sits in there who knows what the hell he's talking about. And so, like, that's great. But is Whole Foods going to scale up and have, someone who knows, like someone like us running their every single wine department? I don't know, probably not. But so I don't think, like, for people who truly want these kinds of geeky and fine wines, like top end stuff, like you go into Total Wine or one of those places, they have all the high end name recognized fine wine. So yes, people do buy stuff there. But you mean to tell me that, some little pipeño from Chile is going to be like a focus of theirs? No. So right. It's, I think there will always be a place for people like us, but in the end, it just makes things that much harder, right? Because, I mean, let's be honest, the people who walk into fine wine retailers in New York City who are known more for their volume and their massive selection, the people who frequent those stores are not the kind of people who want to come in and, hear all the little details about things and ask questions. They're people who go in there because they think that's the place with the biggest selection and, by extension probably has the best prices, and it's in my neighborhood or whatever. Those are the people who are just going to be like, screw it, I'm at the store here now, I'm just going to buy something I recognize. So yeah, I mean, I kind of got off topic here a little, but like I think there will always be a place for us, but it's just going to make things that much more difficult.
Yeah, and it's the true commoditizing
right.
of this industry,
right? Which
is what will happen. It's what happens anytime there's mass consolidation.
Yeah.
Is that whoever is benefiting from that consolidation will just hone in on what is most expedient for them.
Yeah.
And what's going to turn and burn, what's going to be the most profitable. And that's at the expense of all the other things, which by and large have been the things that people like you and me have really cared about.
Right. Right.
And the reason why I say, like, the idea that this is cyclical. So even if all the things that I fear could happen in terms of the consolidation, it's not even so much that I fear, like, well, the two bigs are the ones that are going to just consolidate everything. It'll just be the biggest.
The biggest, yeah.
The biggest of what's already existing in this landscape, where there's already just been a lot of entry into the market in terms of portfolios. So instead of having 200 books, maybe there's going to be 50.
Yep.
Okay, but eventually that'll mean that someone comes along with something new and something cool with a small portfolio, and it's like the cycle kind of starts over again. I mean, it's like, look back at the landscape. The Golden Age era, the beginning of that landscape, most of the places didn't have natural wine.
Right.
It wasn't really a thing yet. As that became a thing, then you started seeing people who really had no interest in it paying attention to it and dedicating space to that. And then it got to the point where it was like, well, if you don't have that, if that's not a focus, then you start to become sort of irrelevant.
Right.
And again, that's just how these cycles kind of go. So that's why I'm long-term optimistic, but in terms of what that means in the short and midterm, I think it means that if people are going to have to make choices with their dollars. So for those that are not industry but are more on the consumer level listening to this, everyone talks about how, like, no, I don't want to buy from Amazon.
Right.
We're going to beat up on them because it's just an easy target. But there are people, I try.
Yeah.
I try to go out of my way to go to the local bookstore instead of just getting the easy, it'll be here tomorrow. That's something that I do think people are going to have to start making choices about.
Yep.
How do you vote with your dollars? Where do you want your dollars to go? Do you want to support places like MCF Rare Wine, or do you want to support a Total Wine? Do you want to support a small portfolio, or do you want to support one of the bigs?
Yep.
It's advertised on the back label.
Yep.
So that would be my takeaway in terms of how do we muddle through all of this, is try to support the people that you feel are doing the best work and that you want to see get through this. Because ultimately that's what it's about. It's about getting through this to get to the other side.
Yep. And that, leaves the nice little space for the rant that I always give to my friends. Like you said it, the of all of the things you feel like you don't have control over in your life, the number one thing you can do is vote with your dollar. It is the simplest solution to every problem, right? Like, the bottom line is if you live in a town that, we always hear the sagas of the, middle American town that used to be this vibrant, local economy and small businesses everywhere, and now they're all shuttered and the town is, empty. The problem is like, what? Everybody decided, oh, Walmart moved in, so I'm going to go there. Yeah, I'm going to save $1.65 on that pair of jeans. Or even $10, right? But at the expense of what? If everybody opens small businesses and people make the choice to support those small businesses and keep their dollars in their local economy, this all gets solved. But I mean, that's like asking, I don't even know what the analogy is there. It's a tough ask. I understand it. Everybody's feeling the pinch, and it's not because like people are, to an extent, right? The brilliance of Amazon was not that it has the best prices, right? I don't know if you've ever listened to that guy Naval Ravikant talk, and he referenced one time that he was an early investor or involved with this company called BizRate because they thought like the future of e-commerce is going to be price shopping. And so BizRate, the whole thing was like, this is where you go to compare to see who has the best price on a given product. But he's like, I was wrong. It was not about price shopping online. It was about convenience. And that's what Amazon knew. And so just make the extra effort. I mean, that's all you can do. I know everybody uses Amazon. I do. I try to just only use it for certain things in certain scenarios. But all you got to do is walk around, especially a neighborhood like this, and see these trucks. Like these guys show up at 6 a.m. And if you're ever out walking early in the morning, all you see are these guys unloading box trucks on every block. They post up in open parking spaces or in the bike lane, and these guys are just out there organizing all of these boxes to put on their, bikes or, their those little
hand trucks.
They have the new
the bikes with
the new
big,
bikes,
things
cars.
You can put all the packages on.
Yeah, it's like a little mini box truck that the guy has to pedal, which is a brilliant business move because you don't need a license to operate that. But anyway, I get it. Like, I mean, it's the convenience is convenience at the end of the day, but we all can vote.
But the thing too, though, is I absolutely understand the plight of the person, the middle American, who has seen their wages totally plummet. Right. With inflation,
stagnate at best.
Everything's I totally understand the idea of going to Walmart.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not mad at that person.
No.
We're talking about our industry, though,
yeah.
which very much is I have disposable income, I want to drink wine.
Yeah.
So I do feel like there is a little bit more room for making those choices. Mm-hmm. You're not up against a wall because you need that bottle of Cab tonight.
Yeah.
So I do think that you can put some more responsibility onto those people that are going out. They have the money. They can decide where they want to spend it.
Yep.
So not trying to lecture too much here, but there's a difference between price shopping your eggs versus where you want to go to get your bottle of wine on a Tuesday night, or where you want to put together that mixed case for the party you're having. Mm-hmm. You can make better choices or different choices with your dollar when it comes to that, because ultimately what you're describing is a very sort of dystopian future that we're already kind of in.
I mean, that is the track we're on. I don't, I don't want to be alarmist, but we are on the track of there being like 4 places to get all of the products in your life, and nobody having a job. Because if you think Amazon is going to keep hiring people when they don't have to, when they can have a robot do it 24/7, 365, and never need to stop and take a leak. Come on, let's be honest here. But we've gotten a little, like you said, a little outside the core focus of what we were talking about today.
Well, here's a way to bring it back. One of the conversations that has existed in the milieu of wine, for like the wine geekdom is when you're talking about wine, like what makes a natural wine, what makes this kind of wine.
Yeah.
There's boxes that get checked. Okay.
Yeah.
One of those boxes is the choice to harvest by machine or by hand. And I completely understand the winemaker's dilemma, particularly in recent years, where actually getting people to come and do harvest has become way more challenging.
Right.
And the cost of that, et cetera. But again, we're not talking about having to make the choice between I only have $20 in my budget and I need to stretch that because I'm trying to feed my family.
Right.
We're talking about buying wine here and making these ethical choices.
Right.
So if we're going to really sort of get down into the details of like, well, I really only want to drink wines that come from vineyards that aren't irrigated and are hand harvested and this and that. Like, okay, then you definitely have the ability to really pick and choose who you want to give your money to.
Yep.
It's like the same thing with, if you remember last year before the election, there was the port strikes.
Yep.
And one of the things that involved was the idea that the union wanted guarantees that they weren't going to automate. And I listened to both sides of the argument, and at a certain point, it just comes down to like, what kind of society do you want to live in?
Yes, that's it.
Yes, all of these things make total sense if you're looking at everything as a business decision. But if you're going beyond the business decision, then it really does come down to what kind of society do you want to live in? And this is like way more bigger picture thinking, but this does come back to specifically to this business because again, people do have the ability to make those kinds of decisions and they can do it with a way more informed perspective than I think they have done previously. So that's, that I think is probably the takeaway of what can we do here. Like when we started this, we hoped that we could at least like, okay, we're going to bitch a lot, but can we come to something by the end where maybe there's some like, well, if we all do this, then things could be better. I think Lily was like, everyone drink more. Which, yes, okay, great. But also make a little bit more, have a little bit more information and maybe ask some more questions when it comes to where, like, look, there's plenty of people. One of the downsides of the whole pandemic is that like people got really used to not socializing. People got really used to siloing themselves in their home, in their apartment. And it's really easy to do Uber Eats and to, do all this stuff. But like at the end of the day, I think there's a human component. Like where you want to go out and you want to interact with people. Going out and buying a wine buying a bottle of wine should be that occasion to develop a relationship with someone. I mean, I know that's why you started this shop.
Yeah. I mean, and that's, especially in terms of our local customers, but it's the same thing with customers all around the country who they're either walking in here to buy a bottle, or they're calling up on the phone, or they're emailing, and the conversation is never just like, I'll take 5, thanks, or I'll take a bottle. Like some of these younger kids with their headphones on, they come in and they don't even make eye contact, don't say a word, whatever. That's a whole other discussion. But by and large, the reason, I mean, like, I can't, I don't have a transaction with somebody at the front desk without being like, oh, hey, how are your kids, or what's going on, how about this weather, that whole kind of thing. And it's a conversation. I mean, everything is at least a 5-10 minute conversation, which is great. I mean, this is ultimately, if we're all divided, we're conquered, right? Not to get into like weird discussions, but like, we're people, and the number one thing that gives life meaning is connection, right? And what brings people together? Food and wine, right? Like we touched on in both podcasts. And, and that's what the customer wants too, ultimately. Like, we get to this point where everyone's just doing everything, Uber Eats and, Amazon and whatever else. People are going to be even less happy right? And you always hear people talking about, like, what's this malaise in society? Why are people so unhappy? And it's because, we're separate from each other, right? So, shop at local businesses. It's like, everybody always likes to, we support small. Like, that's the thing that drives me the most crazy about American Express is their shop small campaign, which is just total propaganda to make you use your Amex. They don't give a crap. You know what? If they wanted to really help a small business, cut your rates. Simple as that. You'll still be plenty rich. So that's where we are. Anything we missed?
I think we covered it.
All right.
So we should be back to the normal format.
Yep.
Working on that. But as these things develop, because as you said, it's like it is total chaos by design.
Right.
So I'm sure there's going to be more of these things that we'll have to get in front of the phone and hash out.
Yeah. So thank you for listening. And we'll see you in episode 4. To tell you the truth,
we have no idea.
Thanks a lot.